He bit into the tortilla and it stuck to the roof of his mouth. Rice and beans tumbled onto his tongue like pebbles from a bucket. The salsa gave a brief, hot splash of moisture, gone in an instant. He chewed slowly, forcing himself not to think about ice water or a Coca-Cola with dewdrops sliding down the glass bottle. By then, he'd been pinned under the boulder for a day and a half. His biggest problem, outside of the obvious, was that he only had a few ounces of water left. He hoped the last of the burrito would help him think. No one knew where he was. No one even knew he was missing. He was alone and stuck. This is the story of Aron Ralston, who cut off his hand to survive, and the burritos that got him through his near-death experience in Bluejohn Canyon, southern Utah. You're listening to True Crime Culinary. I'm your host, Leah Llach. Let's sink our teeth into this story. Let's look at Aron Ralston's early life. He was born October 27th, 1975, in Marion, Ohio. When he was 12, his family moved to Colorado, where he learned to ski, hike, and backpack. He's a smart cookie. Let's just put that out there. A Carnegie Mellon grad with a double major in mechanical engineering and French, plus a piano minor. After a stint in corporate America, he quit to climb Denali. I can totally relate to wanting to peace out of corporate America and go find yourself in nature. But climbing Denali is no easy feat. That climb takes 3 to 4 weeks. It requires a special permit. It forces you to carry everything you need. And Denali's peak is about 20,000 feet, which is lower than Everest, but Everest starts at a higher point. So the total vertical gain is actually longer if you climb Denali than if you climb Everest. The cold drops to about 30 degrees below Fahrenheit, and winds hit at about 70 miles per hour. So what am I hearing? Lots of stress, lots of preparation, not a whole lot of support coming your way if something happens, and also, probably a little bit on the cold side. So Aron knew he was training for something really, really intense. Colorado is great for training because you have altitude, you have mountainous ranges. People in Colorado are pretty nice. Why not, right? What I find so bananas is right before he gets stuck in Bluejohn Canyon, he survives an avalanche. He's, I believe, skiing with his buddies. They get hit by an avalanche. They survive. They're all kind of like, whoa, that was crazy. And then a month later, he sets out by himself. He's thinking, dude, I just survived an avalanche. This is supposed to be such an easy hike. This is going to be fine. If you've never been to Bluejohn Canyon, think of these like beautiful mini canyons and just as far as the eye can see. All you see is little canyons. It almost looks like a giant sieve, but canyons. These areas are prone to flash floods, heat, and people getting disoriented because they basically, you're going through the canyon. So to see high enough, you'd have to climb to the top of the canyon and look around, and everything looks kind of the same. So it's definitely something where you want to be prepared, you want to have a good sense of direction, and you want to make sure that people check in on you if you don't show up after a certain amount of time. So what happened during the accident? Aron was going through the canyons, having a good old time, thinking about nature probably, and an 800-pound boulder shifted. It actually bounced off one hand and pinned the other. Now he's thinking, this is not good. No one knows where I am. My phone doesn't work because I'm in the canyons. It's really, you think about it, there's no reception from inside the canyon, and he can't move. He had 2 burritos, and reports vary. I could find evidence that he had like 10 ounces of water or 5 cups of water, which is more like 40 ounces. But either way, that's not a ton of water when you think about the fact that he's in a ton of pain. He is probably feeling very alarmed at his current situation, and all that uses up more water. But our guy doesn't panic. He thinks to himself, I need to ration this out. So he rations the water and he rations the food. But the burritos he knows are going to go bad. So he eats those within a day and a half. At some point around day 3 or 4, he's realizing that he's just way too dehydrated. At this point, his hand is also decomposing, which is a huge problem because that means that if there's any blood that's circulating from that area of decomposition back into his body, like that's not good. It's just putting junk into your body that you're already at a disadvantage to try and fight. So after 5 days, This guy, remember, he's an engineer, so through a use of a tourniquet and a dull pocket knife, is able to take off his hand. He has to break his bones one at a time in his arm, and then he has to cut through, which, like, do not envy. See, the crazy thing is, though, he's not at the entrance of this park. He's like 8 miles in, so he's not feeling great. He's hiking back. He finds a Dutch family about 6 miles in. They look at him. They're like, OMG. They go call for help, and they give him food and water. At this point, in 5 days, he's lost 40 pounds and a quarter of his blood. So that tells you enough of like how messed up he is after these 5 days. But the good news is they were able to get him help, and 4 hours later, he was airlifted out, and they were able to help him in the hospital. Okay, but what about the culinary collection? Let's talk about burritos. Wrapping food in tortillas is nothing new. Mesoamericans were doing it as early as 1500 BC. In the Southwest, beans and meat were wrapped for travel and preservation. The word burrito means little donkey in Spanish. Why donkeys? There's a couple theories, but primarily it seems to be around the fact that the food was carried on a donkey. Where the stories kind of differ is, one story is that they were basically miners who had to carry food into the mine, and the food was carried on a donkey. The other one is that someone sold these wrapped food gifts of deliciousness off of a donkey. And either way, there's a donkey involved. The word for donkey in Spanish is burro. Unfortunately, I am Salvadoran. However, I cannot roll my R's, so I'm going to work up to it over time on this podcast, but not going to come out the gate hot with it. Burro, little burro, burrito. During my research, I stumbled across an amazing interview via ATTN, which I should know how to... What is that? Attention? I don't know. Sorry. But they are talking about dish history and specifically about burritos. The interviewer sat down with Gustavo Arellano, a renowned food critic based in LA, and talked about the history of burritos. I'll link it in the show notes so you can watch it yourself. It's a real treat. Gustavo also mentioned the different ways that burritos kind of started to gain popularity in the States. What I didn't know was that originally, burritos were really small, maybe the size of a thick cigar, and the tortillas were smaller and almost translucent. They'd be filled with beans and cheese. That was the original burrito. And the reason that they were started was because of the farmers through the Bracero program from 1942 to 1964, where Mexican men came to the U.S. for short-term labor contracts, and they'd have to be fed. And so they were given tortillas and some easy-to-use fillings like cheese and beans. However, the original Braceros actually didn't like the burritos, because the Braceros were actually from central Mexico, but burritos were more of a northern Mexico and on the border of the U.S. type thing. So they felt discriminated against, which I can totally understand. Kind of assuming that all Mexicans are the same is not really cool. But that is where we started with the burrito, and then from there, it kind of took on different life in different parts of the world. I live in California, and I probably eat 2 burritos per week. I am absolutely spoiled with the amount and variety of burritos I can get, basically within 10-minute drive of my house. One of the more popular versions is the Mission Burrito, which is from the Mission in San Francisco. Another one is the California Burrito, where you have fries in it. But really what we can take away is that what started as a very humble beginning to just feeding people who worked really hard every day and actually felt a little bit discriminated against became a way for a ton of people, regions, communities to express themselves into something that goes from the size of a cigar to the size of a football. For me, burritos were part of how I survived college. I was a rower, and all of my rower friends, we needed a lot of calories. So for us, it was also a community aspect of being able to sit together, talk about the day's rowing, and go on to feel full and be able to do our homework. Something about this story that is actually kind of ironic is the main threat to Aron was not the fact that he was going to starve, it was that he was going to run out of water. But that even applies to eating the burrito. Digestion for the human body requires water. So when I looked up how much the burritos extended his chances of surviving, the answer is it actually probably didn't, because he probably lost water in the digestion of his burritos to eat them. But now we know. Always have enough water. Make sure that you bring a burrito because it's delicious. And check out as many different burrito spots as possible. It's a great way to get to know your local restaurants and different expressions of the same food. Until next time, stay curious and be careful what's in your cup. Check out our show notes for sources, hit that subscribe button, rate and review the podcast anywhere you listen. If you want to follow me outside of the podcast, check me out on TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube at But First Bread, where I share clips from the podcast, recipes you can cook safely at home, and plenty of food and fashion fun. Until next time.